When I tied the knot, I kept quiet about the $25.6 million business I inherited from my grandfather. Thank God I did, because the day after the wedding my mother-in-law arrived with a notary and forced me to sign it away. Can you imagine getting married, looking into the eyes of the man you love, thinking your biggest secret is safe, only for your new mother-in-law to ambush you the very next day, demanding you sign over your multi-million-dollar company? My wedding night ended with a betrayal so calculated, it still makes my blood run cold. My name is Samantha Harlow, and at 32, I became the secret owner of a $25.6 million company. See, my grandfather, Walter Harlow, was a legend. He built Harlow Technologies from his garage in 1975, and by the time I was born, it was a respected software development firm. Grandpa Walt didn't just spoil me with toys, he taught me business. Sammy, he'd say, leaning back in his worn leather chair, in business and in life, you need to protect yourself. Not everyone has good intentions, especially when money is involved. I spent every summer at the company, working my way up from the mailroom to customer service, then marketing. By the time I had my MBA, I knew Harlow Technologies inside and out. My grandfather beamed when I suggested our cybersecurity expansion, a move that eventually doubled our revenue. Then, 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer took him. The devastation was immense. At the will reading, I discovered he'd left me 75% ownership of the company. Your grandfather believed in you more than anyone, his lawyer, Frank Thompson, told me privately. You have the head for business and the heart for people. The perfect combination. Taking over as CEO was terrifying, but I channeled my grief into honoring his legacy. I kept my personal life low-key, no flashy cars, no luxury apartments shouting about my wealth. I lived comfortably, modestly, in a downtown loft, drove an older Audi, and continued his tradition of anonymous philanthropy. It was at one of these charity galas, for children's literacy, that I met Jason. I'd made a significant donation, but asked for no recognition. As I admired the artwork, a tall man with kind eyes approached. Beautiful, aren't they? He said, gesturing to a colorful painting. One of my students created that. He was Jason Miller, 34, a fourth-grade teacher, never married. He had an easy laugh, a genuine way of listening. When he asked what I did, I gave my standard answer: I manage investments for a technology firm. Not a lie, but definitely not the whole truth. Our first date was coffee, he insisted on paying. Our second, a hike where we talked for hours. Jason was close with his mom, Eleanor, who'd raised him alone after his dad left when he was 10. She sacrificed everything for me, he explained, watching the sunset. Worked 2 jobs to put me through college. We're all each other has. His dedication to his mother touched me deeply. Family loyalty, my grandfather had valued that above all. By our 5th date, I was falling hard. 3 months in, Jason invited me to Sunday dinner to meet Eleanor. I wore casual clothes, minimal jewelry, wanting to make a good impression without flaunting anything. Eleanor Miller lived in a modest 2-bedroom home, meticulously kept, plastic covers on furniture, family photos everywhere. Jason has told me so much about you, Eleanor said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she assessed me. He says you work in investments. That must be lucrative. It can be, I replied cautiously. But it's more about helping the company grow sustainably than quick profits. Throughout dinner, she grilled me: family background, salary, benefits. Jason looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mom, this isn't a job interview, he finally interrupted. I'm just getting to know the woman my son is so smitten with, Eleanor replied with a tight smile. Is that a crime? Despite that awkward first meeting, Jason and I grew closer. He was thoughtful, passionate about education, and made me laugh every day. 8 months in, he proposed during a beach getaway. We were walking at sunset, he dropped to one knee, presenting a modest, beautiful diamond ring. Sam, I know this seems fast, he said nervously. But when you know, you know. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me? I hesitated. My grandfather's words about protecting myself echoed. But looking into Jason's earnest eyes, I pushed those concerns aside. Yes, I whispered, tears forming. Yes, I will. That night, celebrating, I almost told him about the company, about my actual wealth. The words were right there. But something held me back. A faint, unidentifiable warning bell. I decided I'd tell him soon, after the wedding. Once we were husband and wife, I promised myself I'd tell him everything. I had no idea how fateful that decision would prove to be. The moment we announced our engagement, Eleanor appointed herself chief wedding planner. My vision of a small, intimate ceremony quickly expanded. "You can't have the reception there," she'd say, dismissing my ideas. "What about the Westlake Country Club? I know it's pricey, but surely your investment job pays well enough." Every conversation somehow circled back to finances. Over brunch one Sunday, while Jason refilled coffees, Eleanor leaned in conspiratorially. "Have you two discussed joining accounts after the wedding?" she asked. "I've always believed marriage means sharing everything. No secrets, especially about money." "We haven't decided yet," I replied carefully. "We both value some financial independence." Her smile tightened. "Independence is for single people, Samantha. Marriage is about becoming one unit." The red flags kept mounting. One afternoon, I stopped by Jason's apartment to drop off marriage license paperwork. Eleanor, who had a key, was supposedly there to drop off a casserole. I found her in Jason's home office, rifling through a stack of my documents I'd left on his desk, including investment statements for my personal accounts. "Oh," she startled, quickly rearranging the papers. I knocked over these while dusting. Such a mess. The statements had been neatly organized in a folder. She couldn't have knocked them over. I said nothing, but made a mental note to be more careful. 2 weeks later, I overheard a conversation that sent ice through my veins. I arrived early to Jason's apartment for dinner and was about to knock when I heard raised voices inside. "Mom, you need to stop pushing," Jason was saying. "Sam and I will figure out our finances ourselves." "I'm only thinking of your future," Eleanor insisted. "You've struggled with student loans for years while she's clearly doing well. Marriage means her money becomes family money. That's how it works." "That's not why I'm marrying her," Jason exclaimed. "Of course not, sweetheart," Eleanor's voice softened. "But there's nothing wrong with ensuring financial security in your marriage. Just talk to her about joint accounts after the wedding. Once everything's legal, you'll both be protected." I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Was Jason marrying me for money? Money he didn't even know I had? Or was Eleanor manipulating him? That night, I called my best friend, Katie, who had been suspicious of Eleanor from the start. "I don't know if I'm being paranoid," I confessed. "You're not paranoid. You're perceptive," Katie said firmly. "Eleanor sees you as a meal ticket." "Have you told him about the company yet?" "No," I admitted. "I was waiting until after the wedding." "Don't," Katie advised. "Something feels off. Protect yourself first, then see if he's worth trusting with the truth." The next day, I called Frank Thompson, my grandfather's lawyer. "I need to make sure my assets are protected before my marriage," I explained, "especially the company." Frank immediately scheduled a meeting. "Your grandfather would be proud of your caution," he said as we reviewed options. Many people let love cloud their financial judgment. We established an irrevocable trust for my company shares, created prenup drafts, though I hadn't decided about presenting them to Jason, and ensured multiple layers of legal protection. If anyone, including his spouse, tried to claim ownership of Harlow Technologies, they'd face a legal labyrinth designed to protect my grandfather's legacy. "This feels deceptive," I confessed to Frank. "Shouldn't marriage be about trust?" "Trust is earned gradually," he reminded me. Your grandfather didn't even tell his own wife about certain business details until they'd been married 10 years. Protect the business first, then share information with Jason when you're ready. As the wedding approached, my anxiety spiked. I caught Eleanor making comments to relatives about Sam's important business connections and how Jason was marrying into a comfortable situation. Each remark strengthened my resolve to keep my wealth private until I could be certain of both Jason's and Eleanor's intentions. The night before our wedding, as tradition dictated, we spent apart. I lay awake, wondering if I was making a mistake. Not about Jason, I truly loved him, but about starting our marriage with such a significant secret. The weight of my $25.6 million company hung over me like a storm cloud on what should have been the happiest time of my life. After the ceremony, I promised myself again. Once we're married, I'll find the right moment to tell him everything. Little did I know, Eleanor already had plans of her own. Our wedding day dawned with perfect September weather, sunshine, blue skies, a gentle breeze. I'd chosen a simple, elegant dress, nothing extravagant, despite Eleanor's persistent suggestions for something more dramatic, befitting your position. The ceremony was at Riverside Gardens, a beautiful outdoor venue that wouldn't break the bank for someone on a teacher's salary. I'd insisted on splitting costs evenly, though in reality, I anonymously covered most expenses through a wedding planner sworn to secrecy. Katie arrived early to help, bringing champagne and a steady stream of encouragement. "You look stunning," she said. "Ready for this?" "I think so," I replied. "I love Jason. The rest we can figure out." "And have you decided when you'll tell him about Harlow Technologies?" she asked. I nodded. "During our honeymoon. We're staying at Lakeview Resort. Nothing flashy, but private. I'll explain everything then, including why I kept it secret." Katie squeezed my hand. "For what it's worth, I think Jason really does love you. It's just his mother I don't trust." "She'll be my mother-in-law after today," I reminded her. "I need to find some way to make peace with Eleanor." "Good luck with that," Katie muttered. At the venue, everything looked perfect. Wildflowers, lanterns, the setting sun about to provide a gorgeous backdrop. Guests began to arrive. Eleanor appeared in a beige dress that somehow looked both expensive and martyred. She inspected the arrangements with a critical eye before approaching me in the bridal suite. "Samantha, dear," she said, air-kissing my cheeks. "Such a lovely little ceremony you've planned. Simple is best, isn't it? Though I still think the country club would have been worth the investment." "This is perfect for us," I replied firmly. "Well, what matters is that after today, you'll both be family." Her emphasis on family sent a chill down my spine. "And family shares everything, don't they? Joys, sorrows, responsibilities, assets." Before I could respond, my wedding coordinator announced it was time. Eleanor grasped my hands with surprising strength. "I'm so looking forward to having a successful daughter-in-law join our family," she said, her eyes calculating. "Jason deserves every advantage after his difficult childhood." As she walked away, Katie appeared. "What did the Wicked Witch want?" "To remind me that family shares everything," I said quietly. Katie rolled her eyes. "Including your bank account, I'm sure." "Let's just get through today," I whispered. "I'm not letting Eleanor ruin this." The ceremony itself was beautiful. When Jason saw me walking down the aisle, the love in his eyes seemed genuine and deep. His hands trembled slightly as he took mine, and his voice cracked with emotion during his vows. "Samantha, you came into my life unexpectedly and changed everything," he said. "I promise to stand by you, support your dreams, and be the partner you deserve. My heart is yours completely and forever." I believed him in that moment. Whatever Eleanor's schemes, Jason's love felt real. During our first dance, I almost blurted out my secret. The weight of it pressed on my chest as Jason held me close. "I have something important to tell you," I began. "What is it?" he asked, his eyes warm and attentive. Before I could continue, the DJ announced the father-daughter dance. My father had passed away years ago, so my uncle stepped in. The moment for confession had passed. Throughout the reception, I noticed Eleanor engaged in intense conversations with various guests, including some of my colleagues who had no idea I owned the company they worked for. She seemed to be gathering information, piece by piece. During the cake cutting, Eleanor clinked her glass. "I'd like to make a toast to the beautiful couple," she announced. "To Jason and Samantha, may your union bring you both the security and prosperity you deserve, and may you always share your blessings equally as true partners should." Several guests exchanged confused glances at the strange emphasis. Jason shifted uncomfortably beside me. As the reception wound down, Eleanor approached us again, this time with a document folder. "A wedding gift," she explained, handing it to Jason. "Just some paperwork for you both to review tomorrow. Nothing that can't wait until after your wedding night." Jason took the folder with an unreadable expression. "Thanks, Mom." Later, as we prepared to leave, I found a moment alone with Jason. "Your mother seems very interested in our finances," I commented carefully. Jason sighed. "She struggled so much when Dad left. It made her obsessed with financial security. Don't worry about it. I'll talk to her." "Promise me something," I said, taking his hands. "Promise that whatever happens, whatever decisions we make, they'll be ours, not your mother's." "I promise," he said, kissing me softly. "You come first now." "Always." I wanted desperately to believe him. We arrived at Lakeview Resort after 11 p.m., exhausted but happy. The lakeside cabin I'd booked was rustic but comfortable, with a stone fireplace and panoramic windows overlooking the water. "This is perfect," Jason said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as we gazed at the moonlight reflecting on the lake. "Just you and me." That night, as we consummated our marriage, I pushed away all thoughts of secrets, companies, and interfering mothers-in-law. For those few hours, we were simply Sam and Jason, two people who loved each other, starting a life together. If only that feeling could have lasted past breakfast. We awoke late the next morning, sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. Jason kissed me tenderly. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," he murmured. "Good morning, husband," I replied, savoring the moment. We had planned 2 nights. I decided I'd tell him about Harlow Technologies that evening, after a day of hiking and relaxation. The resort restaurant had a private dining area where we could talk uninterrupted. After a leisurely breakfast on the cabin's deck, Jason's phone buzzed. "It's Mom," he said, frowning at the screen. "She says there's a plumbing emergency at my apartment. Water everywhere. She needs us to come back right away." "Can't she handle it?" I asked, disappointment washing over me. "Or call a plumber." "She says the super needs the tenant present," Jason explained, already standing. "I'm sorry, Sam. We can come back afterward." Something felt off about the timing, but I couldn't argue with a potential property emergency. We packed quickly and checked out, promising to return that evening. The drive back to the city took 40 minutes. As we approached Jason's apartment, I noticed nothing unusual. No maintenance vehicles, no signs of water damage. "That's strange," I commented. "You'd think there would be some activity for a major plumbing issue." Jason parked and checked his phone again. "Mom says she's waiting upstairs. Maybe they already fixed the leak." The moment we walked into the apartment, I knew we'd been manipulated. There was no water damage. Instead, Eleanor sat primly on the sofa beside a balding man with a briefcase. A younger woman stood nearby with a notary stamp visible on the table. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between them. "Where's the plumbing emergency?" "I'm sorry for the little white lie," Eleanor said, not looking sorry at all. "But this is actually an emergency of a different sort, a financial one that needs immediate attention." The balding man stood, extending his hand. Curtis Dawson, attorney at law. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Miller. I didn't take his hand. What is this about? Eleanor's pleasant facade dropped instantly. This is about honesty and marriage, Samantha. Or should I say, Ms. CEO of Harlow Technologies? My blood ran cold. Jason's face registered shock, then confusion. What are you talking about, Mom? He asked. Eleanor smiled thinly. Your wife has been keeping secrets, Jason. Big ones. She's not just some investment manager. She owns a multi-million-dollar company. $25.6 million, to be exact. She turned to me, eyes glittering with triumph. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I'd let my son marry someone with hidden assets? I hired a private investigator the day after you got engaged. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. I looked at Jason, trying to gauge if he'd known about this ambush. Is this true? He asked me, his expression unreadable. Before I could answer, Eleanor pressed on. Mr. Dawson has prepared the appropriate documents to transfer partial ownership of Harlow Technologies to Jason, as would be proper between spouses. Ms. Bradley here is a notary who will witness the signatures. She gestured to the stack of papers on the coffee table. Now that you're legally married, it's time to combine assets properly. I found my voice at last. You arranged all this? A fake emergency to ambush me with legal documents? And you expect me to just sign over my company? Not the entire company, Curtis Dawson interjected smoothly. Just 50% ownership, which is standard in marital property. There is nothing standard about this, I said, anger replacing shock. And it's not how marital property works in this state. I turned to Jason, whose face had paled considerably. Did you know about this? He hesitated just long enough for my heart to crack. I knew Mom had concerns about your finances. She mentioned discovering you had more assets than you disclosed, but I didn't know about this meeting. Not exactly. Not exactly? I repeated incredulously. What does that mean? Eleanor cut in. Jason and I discussed the importance of financial transparency after marriage. He agreed you should share your assets with him. Is that true? I demanded, looking directly at Jason. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. Mom said it was strange you were so secretive about your job. She thought you might have some savings you weren't disclosing. I agreed we should be open about finances, but I never asked for this. He gestured at the papers. But you discussed it, I said flatly. You and your mother talked about getting access to my money. That's not how it was. Jason protested, weakly. Eleanor stood, impatient with our exchange. Enough drama. The fact is, you concealed significant assets before marriage. Now it's time to rectify that oversight. She picked up a pen and held it out to me. Sign the papers, Samantha. It's what's best for everyone. I laughed without humor. Best for everyone, or best for you, Eleanor? For the family, she insisted. Jason deserves security after everything he's been through. And you think taking half my company provides that security? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. The company my grandfather built from nothing and entrusted to me? Technically, Curtis Dawson interjected, these documents would transfer 25% to Jason and 25% to a family trust that would benefit both Jason and Eleanor. In case that's enough, I cut him off, turning back to Eleanor. You want half my company. In your control. Let's be perfectly clear about what's happening here. Eleanor's mask slipped completely then. You owe it to this family. Do you think I'd let my son marry someone who could walk away with millions while he's left with nothing? Sign the papers. The notary, Ms. Bradley, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Perhaps I should come back another time, she suggested, reaching for her stamp. Stay right there, Eleanor commanded. We're resolving this today. I took a deep breath, centering myself. My grandfather had prepared me for business confrontations, teaching me to remain calm when others lost control. I will not be signing anything today, I said firmly. In fact, Mr. Dawson, I suggest you research my company more thoroughly before presenting such documents. Had you done your due diligence, you'd know that Harlow Technologies' ownership is protected by multiple layers of trusts and legal safeguards that make what you're attempting impossible and potentially actionable as attempted fraud. Curtis Dawson paled visibly. Mrs. Miller, I was led to believe these were standard postnuptial arrangements with a willing participant. Well, you were misled, I replied. And I would reconsider your client relationship if I were you. Eleanor's face contorted with rage. You can't do this. You tricked my son into marriage under false pretenses. That's rich coming from the woman who just faked a plumbing emergency to ambush me with a notary. I shot back. I turned to Jason, who stood frozen in the middle of the room. And you? Did you marry me knowing about this plan? Was getting access to my money the goal all along? No, he exclaimed. I had no idea about the company, Sam, I swear. Mom just said you were hiding something financial and we should address it after the wedding. And you thought that was appropriate? I asked. To conspire with your mother about my finances? Jason had no answer. His silence was damning. I grabbed my purse from where I'd dropped it by the door. I need to leave right now. Eleanor stepped toward me, desperation in her eyes. If you walk out that door without signing, you'll regret it. I paused, turning back to her with ice in my voice. Is that a threat, Eleanor? It's a promise, she hissed. I'll make sure everyone knows you tricked Jason. That you're a liar who hid millions from her husband. I smiled without warmth. And I'll make sure everyone knows you tried to coerce your daughter-in-law into signing over company assets the day after her wedding. Which story do you think sounds worse? Without waiting for an answer, I looked at Jason one last time. His face registered shock, confusion, and the dawning realization that he'd made a terrible mistake. I thought you were different, I said quietly. I thought what we had was real. Then I walked out, closing the door firmly behind me. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, tears blurring my vision. Eventually, I found myself outside Katie's apartment building. She opened her door, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside. What happened? She asked, leading me to her couch. You're supposed to be on your honeymoon. Through broken sobs, I explained the entire nightmare, Eleanor's ambush, the notary, Jason's complicity. Katie listened without interrupting, her expression darkening with each detail. That manipulative witch, she finally exploded when I finished. And Jason, how could he let this happen? I don't know what to do, I admitted, accepting the glass of wine she pressed into my hands. I'm legally married to someone who apparently conspired with his mother to get access to my company. You need to call Frank Thompson right now, Katie insisted. This is exactly why your grandfather taught you to be cautious. I nodded, pulling out my phone. Frank answered on the second ring, and his reaction was immediate and decisive. Come to my office first thing tomorrow, he instructed. Don't communicate with either of them until we've discussed your options. And Samantha, your grandfather would be proud of how you handled this. That night, I stayed in Katie's guest room, checking my phone periodically. Jason had called 17 times and left 8 voicemails, each more desperate than the last. Sam, please call me back. It wasn't what it looked like. I had no idea what Mom was planning. Please believe me. I didn't marry you for money. I don't care about the company. I couldn't bring myself to listen to all of them. My wedding ring felt heavy and foreign on my finger. I slipped it off and placed it on the nightstand, finally falling into restless sleep around 4 a.m. The next morning, Frank Thompson welcomed me into his office with understanding in his eyes. At 72, he had the same shrewd intelligence as my grandfather, along with a grandfatherly warmth that made me feel protected. "First, let me assure you that your company is completely secure," he began. "The trusts we established before your marriage make it impossible for anyone, including a spouse, to claim ownership without your explicit consent through very specific legal channels." I exhaled in relief. So Eleanor's documents were meaningless? "Worse than meaningless," Frank confirmed. "What she attempted could potentially be considered attempted fraud or coercion. If you wanted to pursue legal action." "I don't," I said quickly. "I just want this nightmare over with." Frank nodded. "Then let's discuss your marriage. You have several options. None of them pleasant, I'm afraid." He outlined the possibilities: immediate annulment on grounds of fraud, divorce, messy but straightforward given how brief the marriage was, or attempting reconciliation with clear legal boundaries. "What would you do?" I asked him. "If your daughter were in my position?" Frank removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. "I'd want to be absolutely certain about Jason's involvement before making any permanent decisions. He may be a victim of his mother's manipulation, too. But he knew something." I insisted. "He admitted they discussed my finances." "Many people discuss finances before marriage," Frank pointed out gently. "The question is whether he intended to defraud you or was manipulated by Eleanor. Only you can determine that, Samantha." I left Frank's office with a plan to take a week's leave from Harlow Technologies to sort through my personal crisis. My assistant was told only that I was extending my honeymoon leave due to personal matters. Back at Katie's apartment, I found 3 deliveries waiting: flowers, a handwritten letter, and a small package, all from Jason. The letter was 8 pages of explanation and apology. I read it twice, trying to discern genuine remorse from damage control. "Mom has always been obsessed with financial security," he wrote. "After she met you, she became convinced you were hiding something. She kept suggesting you might be in debt or have financial problems you weren't disclosing. It never occurred to me you might be wealthy. I just thought Mom was being paranoid and overprotective, as usual." He claimed he'd agreed to discuss finances openly after the wedding but had no knowledge of Eleanor's plans with the notary. The package contained his copy of our marriage certificate and the key to his apartment, symbolic gestures of placing control in my hands. "It all sounds convenient," Katie commented when I showed her the letter. "He gets to blame everything on Mommy dearest." "But what if he's telling the truth?" I asked. "What if he really is just caught between his manipulative mother and me?" Katie sat beside me on the couch. "There's only one way to find out. You need to talk to him on your terms, not his or Eleanor's." After 3 days of soul-searching, I texted Jason. "We need to talk. Bring your mother. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Thompson Legal Offices downtown. This is non-negotiable." His response was immediate. "We'll be there. Thank you for giving me a chance to explain." I spent that night reviewing everything I knew about Jason, searching for signs I might have missed. Had there been indications of his true character that love had blinded me to? Or was he truly the good man I believed I'd married, just with an unhealthy attachment to his manipulative mother? The next morning, I met with Frank to prepare for the confrontation. "I need to know exactly where I stand legally and what my options are going forward," I explained. "You're in a position of strength," he assured me. "Don't forget that. They have no leverage except your feelings for Jason." At exactly 2 p.m., Frank's assistant showed Jason and Eleanor into the conference room. Jason looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, clothes wrinkled. Eleanor, by contrast, was immaculately dressed, though her pinched expression betrayed her displeasure at the setting. Frank introduced himself as my attorney, causing Eleanor's eyebrows to shoot up. "You already had a lawyer ready to ambush us," she accused. "Ms. Miller," Frank said coolly. Given that you arranged a notary and attorney to surprise my client the day after her wedding, I suggest you reconsider your position on who is calculating in this situation. Eleanor bristled, but fell silent. Jason hadn't taken his eyes off me since entering the room. Sam, he began, I can't tell you how sorry. I raised a hand to stop him. Before anyone says anything else, I want complete honesty about what happened. Both of you need to understand my position. I took a deep breath. Yes, I own Harlow Technologies. My grandfather left it to me 3 years ago. Its current valuation is approximately $25.6 million, and I serve as CEO. I kept this information private while dating because my grandfather taught me to be cautious about people's intentions when wealth is involved. I looked directly at Eleanor. It seems his caution was warranted. If you had been honest from the start, Eleanor began, but Jason cut her off. Mom, stop. Just stop. He turned to me. Sam, I had no idea about any of this. About the company, about your wealth, none of it. And I definitely didn't know Mom had hired a private investigator or arranged that ambush with the notary. Eleanor scoffed. We discussed her secrecy multiple times, Jason. I told you she was hiding something. You made it sound like she might have debt or financial problems. Jason shot back. You never once suggested she was wealthy. You led me to believe we needed to address potential financial issues after the wedding, not orchestrate some bizarre corporate takeover. Their argument laid bare the dysfunction in their relationship. While they bickered, Frank discreetly slid a note in front of me. This appears genuine. He seems as blindsided as you were. Finally, I'd heard enough. Stop! I commanded, and both fell silent. Eleanor, I have one question for you. Why? Why go to such lengths to get access to my company? Eleanor's composure slipped. Just for a moment, in that brief flash, I saw desperation in her eyes before she masked it. I was protecting my son, she insisted, making sure he wasn't being taken advantage of. By orchestrating a scheme to take half my company? I pressed. That doesn't sound like protection. It sounds like theft. You don't understand, Eleanor said, her voice suddenly weary. When Jason's father left, he took everything. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I swore I'd never let Jason experience that kind of insecurity again. Mom, Jason said quietly. What aren't you telling us? Eleanor's carefully maintained facade crumbled. I'm in debt, she finally admitted. Significant debt. Medical bills from my cancer treatment 5 years ago, plus the second mortgage I took out to help pay for your student loans. Jason looked stunned. You told me insurance covered your treatment. And I've been paying you back for school. Not enough, Eleanor whispered. The interest keeps growing. When I realized how successful Samantha's company was, I thought it could solve everything. The room fell silent as the truth finally emerged. Eleanor hadn't just wanted financial security for Jason. She'd wanted a bailout for herself. How much? I asked. How much debt, Eleanor? She named a figure that made Jason gasp. It was substantial, life-altering so for someone on a fixed income, but a drop in the bucket compared to Harlow Technologies' worth. So, this was never about Jason, I said quietly. It was about using my company to solve your financial problems. Eleanor had no response. Her years of manipulation finally exposed. I turned to Jason, who looked shattered by his mother's revelations. And now I need to know where you stand. Not just about this situation, but about us. About our future, if we have one. Jason met my gaze directly. I love you, Sam. I married you because I love you. Not for your money, not for your company, not to solve my mother's problems. I'm horrified by what happened, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. Then he turned to Eleanor. But Mom, this relationship between us has to change. What you did was wrong on every level. If Sam gives our marriage another chance, you need to understand that she is my priority now. Eleanor's face crumpled at her son's words. Decades of codependence challenged in an instant. The choice now lay squarely with me. Walk away from a man I loved because of his toxic relationship with his mother, or try to rebuild on shaky foundations? I need some time, I finally said. This isn't a decision I can make today. As we prepared to leave, Eleanor approached me hesitantly. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for what I tried to do. Desperation makes people do terrible things. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. 2 weeks passed without a resolution. I moved back to my loft, returned to work at Harlow Technologies, and tried to make sense of my suspended life. Jason and I communicated sporadically through carefully worded texts. Neither of us ready to determine our future. Eleanor, surprisingly, maintained her distance. According to Jason, she had finally admitted herself to credit counseling and was working with a financial advisor. She's actually seeing a therapist, too, Jason told me during one of our brief phone calls, something she refused to consider for years. I wanted to believe people could change, that relationships could heal from betrayal. But the memory of that ambush with the notary kept replaying in my mind. One evening, Frank Thompson called with an unexpected update. Eleanor Miller has requested a meeting, he informed me. With you, Jason, herself, and both our legal representatives present. Why? I asked, warily. What could she possibly have to say now? She didn't specify, Frank replied. But she was insistent it would be worth your time. Against my better judgment and Katie's explicit advice, I agreed to the meeting. We gathered once again in Frank's conference room the following afternoon. This time, Eleanor was accompanied by a kind-faced woman who introduced herself as Patricia Walton, a family therapist specializing in financial trauma. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Eleanor began, her usual commanding presence notably subdued. I've spent these past weeks doing some painful self-examination with Patricia's help. She placed a folder on the table but didn't open it. Before I say anything else, I want to apologize. Truly apologize for my actions. What I did was inexcusable. I betrayed your trust, violated your privacy, and tried to manipulate both you and Jason for my own benefit. I remained silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Patricia has helped me understand that my financial anxiety after Jason's father left created unhealthy patterns that I've maintained for decades, Eleanor continued. I became obsessed with controlling financial outcomes, even at the expense of relationships. Jason watched his mother with a mixture of hope and weariness. This vulnerable version of Eleanor was clearly new to him, too. The truth is, Eleanor said, opening the folder, I came today to offer you this. She slid a document across the table. It was a formal, notarized statement renouncing any claim or interest in Harlow Technologies or any of my personal assets, now or in the future. I also want you to have this, she added, pushing forward a sealed envelope. It's a full accounting of my financial situation, all debts, accounts, everything. Complete transparency. Frank reviewed the documents carefully before nodding to me. They appear legitimate. Why the change of heart? I asked Eleanor directly. She glanced at Patricia, who nodded encouragingly. Because I realized I was about to lose my son, Eleanor admitted, her voice breaking. And no amount of money is worth that. Jason reached for his mother's hand, a gesture of support that would have been unimaginable weeks earlier. There is something else you should know, Eleanor continued. After our last meeting, I was diagnosed with anxiety disorder and financial PTSD. It doesn't excuse what I did, but it helps explain it. I'm on medication now and working through therapy. I studied her carefully, looking for signs of manipulation. Instead, I saw something I'd never associated with Eleanor Miller, genuine remorse. I appreciate your apology, I said carefully. And these documents. But trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I understand, Eleanor replied. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to take responsibility and try to make amends. Jason cleared his throat. Sam, I know my relationship with Mom has been unhealthy. I enabled her behavior for years without realizing it. That's changing now, but I understand if it's too late for us. The raw honesty in the room was disarming. This wasn't the calculated Eleanor I'd come to fear, nor the passive Jason who deferred to his mother's wishes. What are you asking for? I directed my question to both of them. A chance, Jason said simply. Not to pick up where we left off. We can't do that. But to try again with healthier boundaries and complete honesty. Eleanor nodded. And I'm asking for the opportunity to earn back some measure of respect, even if trust isn't possible yet. I'm committed to continuing therapy and maintaining appropriate boundaries with both of you. Frank passed me a note. Their actions matched their words so far. Your decision. After a moment's consideration, I made a decision of my own. Eleanor, I began. I appreciate your apology and these documents. They're a meaningful first step. However, I need to be very clear. My relationship with Jason is separate from my relationship with you. Whatever happens between him and me, you and I will need to rebuild from the ground up. She nodded, accepting this boundary without protest. I turned to Jason. And you and I have a lot to discuss before we can decide if our marriage has a future. I'm willing to try, but there need to be clear terms. Anything, he said immediately. Whatever you need. I outlined my conditions: couples therapy, a formal postnuptial agreement drafted by Frank, separate living arrangements for at least 3 months while we worked through our issues, and a complete moratorium on Eleanor's involvement in our financial discussions. And one more thing, I added, I want you to understand my company. Really understand it. The legacy it represents, the responsibility I carry. If we're going to have a future together, you need to see that part of my life. Jason agreed without hesitation. Eleanor, to her credit, supported these boundaries and excused herself from further discussion of our marital issues. As the meeting concluded, I felt a strange sense of cautious optimism. The road ahead would be difficult, full of painful conversations and trust that needed careful rebuilding. But for the first time since the Notary ambush, I could envision a possible path forward. Eleanor paused at the door, turning back to face me. Samantha, she said. Your grandfather was right to protect his legacy so carefully, and he was right to entrust it to you. Whatever happens between you and Jason, I want you to know I recognize that now. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. 6 months after the wedding that had nearly ended before it began, Jason and I sat across from Dr. Marlene Foster, the couples therapist who had guided us through the aftermath of Eleanor's scheme. Today marks our 20th session, Dr. Foster noted, reviewing her notes. Samantha, Jason, how would you assess your progress? I exchanged a glance with Jason before answering. Honestly, it's been the hardest 6 months of my life, but also the most transformative. Jason nodded in agreement. We've had to rebuild everything from the ground up. Trust, communication, boundaries. Some days it felt impossible. The journey had indeed been grueling. For the first 3 months, we lived separately while attending therapy 3 times weekly, individual sessions, couples counseling, and family therapy that occasionally included Eleanor. The postnuptial agreement Frank drafted had been signed without drama, protecting Harlow Technologies while establishing fair terms for our shared marital assets going forward. Eleanor had honored her commitment to maintain appropriate boundaries, continuing her own therapy and credit counseling. The breakthrough for me, I told Dr. Foster, was when Jason truly understood what the company means to me. 2 months into our separation, I had finally brought Jason to Harlow Technologies headquarters, not as a visitor, but as someone learning the business from the ground up. He had spent weeks shadowing different departments, understanding the legacy my grandfather had built and the responsibility I carried. I never realized how personal a company could be, Jason admitted. It's not just assets or profits. It's a living legacy, something created through decades of work and vision. Watching him engage with the business, asking thoughtful questions, connecting with employees, appreciating the culture my grandfather had established, had begun the slow process of rebuilding my trust. And Eleanor? Dr. Foster prompted. How has that relationship evolved? This was more complicated. Eleanor had maintained her distance as promised, focusing on her own recovery from financial trauma and anxiety. The woman who had once orchestrated a notary ambush now sent respectful text messages asking permission before calling. We're not close, I acknowledged. We may never be. But we're establishing a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than manipulation or suspicion. The biggest change, Jason added, is that Mom and I have established healthier boundaries. For the first time in my life, I'm not responsible for her happiness or financial security. Eleanor had indeed made significant progress addressing her financial situation with the help of her therapist and financial counselor. She had consolidated her medical debt, refinanced her mortgage, and created a sustainable budget. Jason no longer felt obligated to supplement her income, though he chose to help with specific expenses occasionally. And your living situation? Dr. Foster asked. 2 weeks ago, after nearly 6 months apart, Jason had moved into my loft. The space felt different now. Truly shared, rather than just mine with a visitor. It's working, I said simply. One day at a time. As our session concluded, Dr. Foster smiled warmly. When you first came to me, you both questioned whether your marriage could survive such a breach of trust so early. The work you've done suggests it not only can survive, but potentially become stronger for having faced this challenge. Outside the office, Jason took my hand as we walked to the car. Dr. Foster's right, you know. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have believed we could get here. Me neither, I admitted. But here we are. That evening, as we prepared dinner together in our kitchen, I reflected on my grandfather's warnings about protecting myself and his business. What are you thinking about? Jason asked, noticing my contemplative mood. My grandfather, I replied. He always said to be cautious about people's intentions when money is involved. For years, I thought he was just being paranoid or cynical, but he wasn't. Jason acknowledged, money changes how people see you, how they interact with you, sometimes in ways they don't even recognize themselves. I nodded. The irony is, by following his advice to protect the company, I actually protected our relationship, too. If you had told me about Harlow Technologies from the beginning, my mother would have sabotaged us before we even had a chance, Jason finished. Or worse, I might have been influenced by her fears and anxieties without realizing it. The painful journey had led to unexpected growth for both of us. Jason had discovered independence from his mother's emotional manipulation. I had learned that protecting myself didn't have to mean isolation or distrust of everyone. I have something for you, I said, retrieving an envelope from my desk. It's not quite an anniversary gift, since our 6-month anniversary isn't exactly a celebration. Jason opened it curiously. Inside was an offer letter for a position at Harlow Technologies, Education Outreach Director. A new role leveraging his teaching background to develop technology education programs for underprivileged schools. This isn't charity or nepotism, I explained quickly. You've earned this with the work you've done learning the business. The board approved it unanimously. His eyes widened. Are you sure? Working together, being married. We've survived worse, I pointed out with a small smile. And I think my grandfather would approve. He always said, business is about more than profit. It's about creating value and legacy. As we discussed the details of the position, my phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. True to our new boundaries, she was requesting permission to call about Thanksgiving plans, rather than simply calling or showing up. Your mom wants to talk about Thanksgiving, I told Jason. What do you think? He asked. Respecting my comfort level, I considered for a moment. I think we can handle a phone call. And maybe dinner next month, depending on how things go. Small steps, careful boundaries, gradual rebuilding of trust. The approach had saved our marriage. Perhaps it could eventually create a healthy relationship with Eleanor, too. Later that night, as Jason slept beside me, I reflected on the tumultuous journey from that disastrous post-wedding ambush to our current cautious happiness. The company remained protected. Our marriage was slowly strengthening. And the toxic dynamics that had nearly destroyed everything were being addressed through honest communication and firm boundaries. My grandfather's voice seemed to whisper in my memory, trust but verify. Protect what matters. And remember, the right people will love you for who you are, not what you own. He had been right all along. Hiding my $25.6 million company before the wedding had indeed been the right decision. Not because it had prevented Jason from accessing my wealth, but because it had exposed Eleanor's scheme before it could do irreparable damage. That initial caution had created the opportunity for honest rebuilding that might not have been possible otherwise. Our story wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, painful, and ongoing. But it was authentic, a relationship based on who we truly were, not the roles or expectations others tried to impose. And that, I realized, was worth more than any company valuation could measure. If you've made it to the end of my story, I'd love to know what you would have done in my situation. Would you have given the relationship another chance like I did, or would you have walked away after such a betrayal? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found value in my experience, thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, protecting yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes, it's the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for those who truly care about you.